in our own bodies, and then we've got our own relationships immediately, and then we look at the wider world, and there's been plenty of people saying, what do we do? I need help. I'd like to have a good relationship with my neighbors. I want to know how to be more able to have conversation with my coworkers that aren't just superficial. Can you help me in my home life, my kids or my spouse? We don't agree, and it's hard, and it makes me nervous. So this is a conversation to help us learn how to have the kind of conversations that can deepen our relationships in the ways that we really desire to. And it's also a conversation about the purpose of who we are. I know everybody is asking those questions, and well, maybe not everybody. I can't speak for everybody. Many people, both in and out the church, are asking those questions. But in the church, we have a particular call for how it is that we respond to those questions. And so this is to equip us not only as individuals in all of our human relationships, but as disciples who follow Jesus. So today, again, an introduction to a longer conversation, and the tools that we're using, the framework that we're using, comes from our Archbishop of Canterbury. And today, you're going to actually hear him, because no one could say it the way he does, so I'm not going to try. Hear from him directly about his vision for the church in the realities of the world that we see on every scale of conflict, to be a reconciling presence in the midst of all that conflict. All humans, he says, are called to reconciliation, that unity, but it's a particular call of Christians because we follow Jesus. And he deeply believes, and we gather each week and we affirm our faith and believe that our faith and Christ in and through us really can make a difference. Many days it feels like it probably can't, but we hold on to the hope that it can. And so he gathered together in his network of reconciliation ministries people like our friend Sarah Snyder, Canon Sarah Snyder, and others who are practitioners in peacemaking and reconciliation work and restorative practices, sometimes on a very big scale, sometimes on a small scale, to design a series of sessions that can help us not only have conversations that might be difficult, but more even start to cultivate some key habits to be aware of in our lives, that if they grow over time, they can help us be the kind of peaceful, peacemaking, reconciling presences in our own immediate circles, and then maybe beyond. But we're just starting with us, that can make a genuine difference. So this isn't a course about now we've equipped you to go and, do some massive cultural, cross-political, massive program. It's something that might lead you in that direction, but what it is meant to do is to be really immediate in our own lives. And so in this series that this is an intro to, we practice using those habits to help us cross divides, navigate disagreement, practice forgiveness in our own lives, and actually risk being hopeful. It feels sometimes easier to be cynical, because then we can't get hurt. But actually take the risk to be hopeful. So the videos today are, again, Justin Welby, in his own words, kind of a teaser. And they really get into not only the what of this, but even more importantly, they get into the why. This is a theological day, a day that I hope will give you a hopeful vision. So this is part one.
I'm Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I believe with all my heart that reconciliation is the call on every human being. We all know we live in a world that is divided, conflicted, and hurting. And though many of us long for our faith to make a difference, it can be very hard to know where to start. It's part of the nature of being human to cause friction. Within ourselves, there's conflict. So many of us struggle with the conflict with bits of ourselves we don't like, or more seriously. Within families, there's often conflict. Part of being a family is learning to disagree well and still love one another. within churches. The miracle of the church is not that like-minded people get on well, as a friend of mine once said. It's that by the power of God's Spirit, people who wouldn't normally be seen dead in the same place learn to love one another. But learn to love one another is the important bit. And then when we get out into wider society, of course, the whole issue in a democracy of politics is about managed conflict. And round the world, we see unmanaged conflict. We see conflict through greed and the exploitation of natural resources. We see war. We see immense cruelty, huge numbers of people fleeing from fighting or from suffering caused by fighting. And then there's the most global conflict of all, the conflict between human beings and their natural environment. And that brings so many questions to mind. Is being a Christian about turning up at church once a week, trying not to do the wrong thing at work or at home or whatever it is? You know, if you're in an office, don't nick the pencils and don't fiddle your expenses. Is that it? God has put us in this world to change it, to be different. And amidst suffering and amidst joy and with purpose, to be those who leave behind us a different and infinitely better landscape than the one we walk into when we're born. God has a problem. God's problem is he's not really that much of an economist. A lot of economics works on equivalence and exchange. You give something and you get something, and they've got to be more or less fair. God's economics works on lavish extravagance, ridiculous overabundance. We look around at the creation. Look at the stars at night. We don't need all those stars. But somehow God, in his almost absurd over-giving, created this cosmos which is so extraordinarily beautiful, beyond anything we will ever fathom, however long we study it. And God is the same with us. His love is not just enough for us. The gift of reconciliation which we are given, the reconciliation we have with God through Jesus Christ, it's not just enough for us. It gives us reconciliation with God, but it gives us so much reconciliation that we can't possibly contain it. It's as though God was filling us not with a jug of reconciliation, but with a fire hose, with an ocean of reconciliation. And so the gift of reconciliation we receive overflows from us into the world around. We are to be the lavish givers of what we have received so lavishly. I think that's the most amazing thing, that the church is a peacemaker because it's received peace. We are reconciled reconcilers. The founder of Christianity didn't lead an army. He didn't found a kingdom of this world. Those in his kingdom don't have passports. There are no frontier guards, no barbed wire. There is a kingdom of love. And authentic Christianity is to be like Jesus, to be Jesus to the world today. So the role of faith, or Christian faith especially, is to be peacemakers. Jesus himself said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." They'll be called the children of God because they show the family likeness. They build peace.
So take a moment, just to yourself. The basic premise of what Archbishop Welby said is that God has put us in this world to change it, to be different. So right now, on your heart, on your mind, where do you most see the need for change? So we're changing the world to be different. Where is it that you're seeing that need? Might be something very immediate, might be something much more large scale. So just a moment to get in touch with your own sense of that need. And now I just want to hear, you can just raise your hand and we'll do sort of popcorn. You don't have to explain why. Just sort of a popcorn. Were there images or phrases that caught your attention as he speaks about human conflict and God's response and the role of the church in that video? There was a lot of one-liners. And I'm sure different ones resonated with different of us. But what were some of the images? Yeah. What was the...
I think there's a big problem, and I think most people will agree, in the world, that you have friends that have a different political opinion, and you have friends that are of a different race, and you have friends that are of a very different religion. And what you tend to do is you tend to avoid conflict, and you tend to avoid conversation about politics or about religion or about any racial differences.
Right.
And yet there's a need to bridge the gap, and it's difficult to know how to do it.
Right. So we recognize the differences, and out of a sense of love and care, what we know how to do best is just not to stir it up. Right? But then you get into avoidance patterns, and you're missing out on how close relationships can be in that real picture of what it is to be the human family and your immediate relationships. But you don't know what to do. Yeah. Images, one-liners, phrases that struck out to you. Being reconciled, reconcilers. It starts with the fact that we are reconciled with God, right? Other images, phrases. The duty to be peacemakers. Okay. I saw something. Yes, Lisa. Yeah.
Being overfilled or overflowed with, like, the fire hose or ocean with peace.
Not the jug, but the ocean. So abundant. God, not only God's creation, God's love, but God's reconciliation, God's peacemaking, yes. Overflow. We can't contain it, he says. Yeah, Stacy.
Too many stars.
Oh, the stars. Yeah. It reminds me a lot of the book of Job. There's so much. Just we don't even need that many, but God doesn't. Yeah, I heard a lot of laughter with God's not a good economist. Right? It's not transactional. It's abundant. It's lavish. Yeah, and the stars are a great image of that. Any other ones? Yeah, Jim.
Not so much a phrase, but what the thought was underneath there is so much of a problem is the language that is used now, whereas people just have a disagreement, now they're enemies.
Right.
And the ease with which we have fallen into that
Right.
has become accepted and known.
Yeah. So the
So you just disagree.
yeah.
That's where we are.
So we're really stuck. Not only is there the conflict that's been there from the beginning, and we know that but we're in a place where just even acknowledging that conflict is already a fight. That automatically puts people on other two sides, which is a different vision than what we've got now with what God does. Yeah, Natalie. Yeah. So all of these things, our inner lives, the ways we have shame and struggle with ourselves, our immediate relationships, our political landscape, and our relationship with creation. Theologically, these are all joined. And the work of Jesus is to heal all of those places in us. And then we are able to also from that work in ways to heal that wider. Yeah, thank you. You had one too.
I was looking at where you want to see the need.
Oh, sure.
And I think that many of us need to learn to love ourselves,
Right.
because we can't love someone else if we don't love ourselves the way God made us.
Yeah. Some of this work really does start with the knowing God's love for us. Knowing ourselves beloved, allowing God's love to make us whole. And that takes a long time, a lifetime, but then that's when it can then flow out of us. Yeah. So that's why this might touch all of us. Some of us might be wanting to be climate activists in this room, and that's where this is going to resonate for you. Some of us may have a personal relationship we're struggling with. Some of us may be struggling with something internally. This conversation is all of the above. Okay. I'm going to move on to part 2. Because now we've identified the problem and we've identified some of the hope, but now there's sort of like, well, what next? Peacemakers will be called the children of God because they show the family likeness. They build peace. How on earth do we go about this?
I'm Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I believe with all my heart that reconciliation is the call on every human being. We all know we live in a world that is divided, conflicted, and hurting. And though many of us long for our faith to make a difference, it can be very hard to know where to start. The gift of reconciliation we receive overflows from us into the world around. We are to be the lavish givers of what we have received so lavishly. But, there's always a but, isn't there? Reconciliation is not only lavish, but it's unbelievably expensive. It's more expensive than we can imagine. It's so expensive that it costs more than we could ever pay. It cost the life of God himself, of Jesus Christ, to put aside the riches of heaven, to live as a servant, to die on a cross in disgrace. That's the cost of reconciliation. So it is no surprise that reconciliation doesn't just happen, and in fact doesn't happen easily or without challenge. I know that from my own experience. Like all of us, there have been bad moments in my life. Moments where I've done cruel things and bad things. Moments where people have done things to me. And where they've been particularly wounding, where it's led to great pain in my life, and I'm thinking of family loss through an accident, then forgiveness and reconciliation, oh, what a mountain that is to climb. So reconciliation is the most precious gift because it begins with our reconciliation with God himself and knowing his love. But the discipline, the demand to let that bubble out of us, oh my goodness, that is learned behavior. It's process, not event. It's something that has to become who and what I am, my identity. And to be honest, it's a lifetime's work and will be completed when we face Jesus Christ. What it isn't is just another to-do list. Do this and it'll work. Press these buttons in this order and it'll unlock the door of reconciliation. Human beings, as we all know, are so much more complicated than that. We'll be introducing you to 3 habits. In other words, what we are as we journey through life with Jesus Christ, what we are is what matters. And what we are is developed by our habits. The first one is be curious. Just being interested where we meet difference, where we meet those who are not like us. I find people utterly fascinating. Even when they jar on me, I suppose over time I'm learning to think, but why is that? What's that about? Why are they like that? Whether they're radically different to me or just a little bit different. So be curious is not to be starting with oneself, but to be starting with the other. And thinking, what's this person really like? Because they're made in God's image, like I am. And the second one is be present. Now, if you're sitting there just checking your phone as I'm whittering on in front of you, you're not present. To be present means you're engaged, you're focused, you're listening, you're actually sticking with it. Sometimes it's really difficult to be present. It's very difficult to be present when people are angry. It's very difficult to be present when people are suffering. It's very difficult to be present when people are desperately hurt, especially when you've hurt them. But to be present is what really matters if you're going to engage in healing conflict. And thirdly, reimagine. I think one of the things I'm most aware of is that in conflict, people can't see anything but conflict. Whether it's in a family or in a nation, they can't imagine a circumstance in which there is not conflict. Part of the work of reconciliation is to enable people to think, what would life be like if? And to allow the work of the Holy Spirit to create in our minds the possibility of a new world in which conflict was healed. The 3 habits. Be curious, be present, reimagine.
So as that video settles in, just a self moment of reflection. Where are you most aware of the challenges in trying to build relationships or cross divides for you right now? Where are you most aware of that for you right now? All right, and now for a little bit of outward reflection together. So one of the main premises of this part of the video is that the discipline and demand to let, knowing it begins with God's reconciling love for us, bubble out of us, that is learned behavior. It doesn't just happen as an event. It's a process that we have to learn. And learn it by cultivating and living into what he identifies as 3 qualities, 3 habits of being, how we relate with the world. Being curious, being present, and reimagining. And reimagining was actually letting the Holy Spirit give us some new imagination, right? What in this piece was ringing out for you? What were you finding either hopeful about or feeling a little bit nervous about when he was talking about those habits and about this work? What questions did it raise? Anything? Yeah.
Well, I had a conversation with a relative, and it was a repeating conflict about religion, which is kind of rare because people tend to avoid religious questions. She was an atheist, or she is an atheist, I guess. And she kept thinking, how would you possibly believe religion? And we had this conversation, and I would tend to just shut up and just let her run her course. Finally, I just got mad, and I said, don't you believe in God? There was a very, very awkward moment. She said, yes.
And you were surprised?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Finally reconciled it.
Yeah.
One step closer.
Yeah. Just like that other possibility, how different the conversation goes if you were, rather than defending where you're coming from, right? Being curious about just what's the story for the other person. Because you don't have anything to defend. You just want to know, right? Yeah. The reimagining.
Sort of, start with the end in mind. How do you imagine this conflict ending?
Yeah.
And that's a great tool. Like in so many things that can apply to your life. But I thought that was an interesting way that you framed it.
Like start with the end. Like really imagine. Yeah, I like that.
Reimagine what this conflict looks like. How can you see it?
Yeah.
Being resolved, or at least moving to the next phase of some sort of reconciliation.
Yeah.
It's a really helpful tool.
Could be a great exercise. Could be a prayer exercise. Could be a journaling exercise. Could be all kinds of different ways to approach that. Yeah. Yeah.
I think he implied this in his be present. We must never make the other person wrong, because the minute I make you wrong, conversation very fantastic.
Right. So you're being curious and then you're being present to receive whatever you're hearing. Right? And that's when it does get hard. That's when either defensiveness or the avoidance that you mentioned because it's uncomfortable. There's so many ways that we can look like we're present but really not be. That's showing up for real. That is hard. And I think it takes practice. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
definitely takes practice. That be curious to me resonates because it's hard. I was in conversation with a friend who we were talking about the kinds of information we read and absorb. And I asked him what he reads, and he named two sources that kind of blew my mind because they're, to me, way over the line, way out there. And I was not curious. I didn't say, what drives you toward that? What is it about them that appeals to you? You got to be kidding me. It's really hard. And I make a practice of trying to be curious, and in the moment, it is difficult.
Yeah, it is. And you've got the question that you've shared with us last year. The question is, I never thought about it that way. Yeah, never thought about it that way.
It can hold you down in the like.
Yeah. Tell me more. Tell me more. Yeah. Got a couple of those placeholders that give you time to breathe and keep going with the conversation. And then, though, that trick of now, are you genuinely curious and are you hanging and staying present? Yeah. Anything else on that one? Yeah, Jim.
I think one of the challenges is many of us work in legal professions.
For sure.
This is all about conflict.
You said it, not me. Yeah. Right.
The challenge is conflict is managed.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't go away. It's managed when you're talking about government systems to replacement for war, or just the way conflict is dealt with. So I look at there's like you're not overcoming it, but how is it a process that's going to be worked through?
Yeah.
I think there's always
Yeah. And the conflict isn't necessarily inherently bad, right? Because the difference of opinions and the friction and the third option that can come, all of that can be really good. It's when we get stuck, locked in, uncurious, pulling back, all of that. That's when we get into real unmanaged conflict. The third video touches on just one of those, the first of the habits. I'll play that one, and then I want to tell you, for those who want to go for further conversation, more about that. So there's only one more, and it's, oh, here we go. The process, not the event. It's about becoming who and what we are with practice. So here's one of those habits. Oh, that's so weird. Yeah. That's so odd. I don't know. And it was fine yesterday. So I don't know what's happened with that one. I think it's okay if we don't do it, though. It's okay. If you can get it, we'll give it 30 more seconds. And if we can't, I'll just talk a little bit about what's in that video and then tell you more about the course. Okay, try it again. No. He goes into a biblical story in which he says there's curiosity, and it's when Zacchaeus, you may remember, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, like the Zacchaeus who climbs up the tree, but he's a tax collector. And in his society, he represents all these things that people are absolutely furious about. There's the actual practices of the tax collectors that in many cases they were kind of taking money off the top and, taxing their comrades, their peers, their family, but also on behalf of an occupying government. So Zacchaeus is unpopular in a lot of ways with the people around him, and there's conflict in his being. But something about him draws him to Jesus, and he's curious and he wants to find out more about this man and his teachings. And Jesus receives Zacchaeus in conversation. He doesn't lecture Zacchaeus from the offset. He goes to his house, he has dinner, they have a relationship, and that is transformative for Zacchaeus. But Jesus doesn't start with, here's what you need to do to change, buddy, right? And so that's kind of the what he gets into in this, is that when we look at that kind of story of both, there was curiosity on both sides, but the space that Jesus gave that allowed for something to happen. And so part of the difference course is in each of the 5 sessions, there's something we're trying to practice doing. There's interactive sessions, conversation, there's a film, there's a Bible passage, and there's things that we're doing that we draw on each of the 3 main habits. There'll be an element of being curious about something, an element of being present to yourself and to others, and then the reimagining work. Okay, So with curiosity, we were kind of all confessing this, I think, already. Take stock for a moment to yourself. Who are the people you struggle to be curious about? Either because you know them too well, or you think you do, or too little. So where do you find yourself especially just failing to be curious or struggling to be curious? And we're going to do that little bit of a reimagining. Just try it right now. Can you imagine, maybe pick someone even. It could be a 3-minute conversation, but can you imagine this week, before we see each other next Sunday, that you might have a conversation with someone when your agenda is absolutely nothing, but just to know them a bit better, what they're about. Go into a conversation with only that goal. You're not doing transaction, no changing any minds, no getting something from them, just getting to know them better. Okay. So you're seeking to understand them better, and then beyond that, even to be able to accompany them, to walk in their shoes. Okay. All right. So if you want to go further, or you want to think about going further with this in a particular way, the Difference course, I've got flyers here if you want to take one and think about it. The QR code scans you to the bigger program, because there are people doing these courses all around the world. They're doing it in schools, they're doing it in churches, they're doing it in communities. And it's our friends at Rose Castle. They were recently gathered as a conference of peacemakers, and I just discovered, I had lunch with a friend from that group, and this is what they were talking about doing. So this is a bigger network. So if you scan the QR code, you find more about the bigger picture. But we're going to do a session here at St. Paul's. It's going to be after the 5 o'clock worship service on Sunday nights for 5 weeks, starting October 13th. It will take us through at least Election Day, and that was planned. Not that this conversation is only about that, and not that this conversation it doesn't continue, but it is a tough time. And so some people were looking for ways to be intentional about being different than what we're seeing on the TV and on the news and how people are relating. So here we go. Here's one way to do that. So after the 5 o'clock service, starting at 5:45, there'll be a little bit of just time to settle in with some snacks, light snacks. And then at 6 o'clock, we'll start with the sessions. Each session includes a film, and it's stories from a real-life Christian facing real-life conflict. So there's a film for us to watch together and react to, rather than something we're bringing to share with one another. So we should watch a film. There's also Bible story and discussion in the mix. There's an interactive session that helps us cultivate the 3 habits, and then there's time for prayer. So we'd imagine going to, I would hold up till 7:15 so that we don't feel rushed, but it could be 7:15. If you want to find out more, or if you are all in, or if you can't do the course but you want to have these kind of conversations and meet people who are interested in this too, Alice Haas has opened up her home on Thursday. And it's actually, we're going to expand that to 5:30 to 7. I'm going to change that and put that back out. 5:30 to 7, she's going to have a drop-in open house, meet and greet, come ask questions about difference, come and be in conversation with each other. Meet some people you might not know before. Be curious, reimagine, and we'll have some more information. And if you want to do that, you can speak to her or email me. And then if you'd like to sign up for the course, email me so we can plan for our numbers. Okay. Any thoughts or questions about the content that I hope you can take away today? The images of God's lavish extravagance. The stars, right? The bad economy.